My father found out I am gay. What happened next changed everything. True gay story. The letter had been sitting in my coat pocket for 11 days. I don't know why I carried it instead of leaving it at home, except that some part of me wanted it close, the way you keep a stone in your shoe just to remember it's there. It wasn't a letter I'd written. It was one my father had never meant for me to read. An old birthday card from my mother, tucked inside a photo album, where she'd written, "Whatever he becomes, love him for it. Don't you dare love him for something he isn't." She'd been gone for 6 years. My father had never once, in that time, said the word gay out loud in my presence. Not when I mentioned a friend too many times. Not when I stopped bringing dates home altogether. Not when I moved 2 states away to a small coastal town called Wrens Bay, ostensibly for a marina engineering job, and stayed for reasons I never explained. The reason was named Theo. I met him on a Tuesday, fixing the outboard motor on a fishing boat that wasn't mine, because the man who owned it had gone inside for coffee and left me the tools. Theo ran the bait shop next door and had wandered over, arms crossed, watching me work with the particular skepticism of a local sizing up a newcomer. "You know that's a 2-stroke, he said. "You're using the 4-stroke oil." I looked up. He had sun-worn hands and a laugh line already carved into his cheek, like he'd spent a lifetime almost smiling. "I know what I'm doing," I said, which was a lie, and he knew it, and he laughed anyway, not unkindly. That was 4 years ago. In that time, Theo had become the quiet center of my days. The smell of his coffee in the mornings, the sound of his truck in the gravel drive, the steadiness of him during the 2 winters my anxiety had gotten bad enough that I couldn't leave the house. He never once made me feel like a burden. He made me feel like a harbor. My father did not know any of this. He knew I lived by the water. He knew I had a roommate. He called on Sundays, always at exactly 6 p.m., and we spoke about weather and boat engines and whether the Steelers would make the playoffs, and neither of us ever mentioned the shape of the life I was actually living. Until the day he showed up unannounced. I heard the truck before I saw it. A diesel engine my body recognized before my mind did. Some old animal instinct from childhood. That's Dad's truck. I stepped onto the porch just as he was climbing out, duffel bag over one shoulder, looking older than I remembered, the way parents always do when you haven't watched the years accumulate on them in real time. "Dad." My voice came out smaller than I wanted. "Surprise trip," he said, which wasn't really an explanation. "Thought I'd see where you disappeared to." I should have called Theo. I should have warned him, told him to stay at the shop a little longer, given myself time to think. But I didn't, because some coward's optimism in me thought maybe my father would leave before evening, and I could keep managing 2 separate lives a little longer. He didn't leave before evening. Theo came home at 6, the way he always did, calling out, "Hey," I picked up, before he rounded the corner into the kitchen and saw my father sitting at the table. I watched it happen in slow motion. Theo's expression flickering, surprise, then a fast, practiced neutrality, the kind you learn from a lifetime of not knowing which rooms are safe. My father's eyes moving between us, taking in the 2 coffee mugs already in the sink from that morning, the jacket on the hook that wasn't mine, the way Theo's hand had, out of pure habit, found the small of my back for half a second before he caught himself. Nobody said anything for the length of time it takes a held breath to become unbearable. Theo started. "No," I said. "Stay." My father looked at me. "You gonna introduce us, or should I guess?" There is a particular kind of exhausted courage that comes after years of almost saying something. It doesn't feel brave in the moment. Feels like falling. "Dad, this is Theo," I said. "He's not my roommate. We've been together 4 years. I love him. I should have told you a long time ago, and I didn't because I was scared of exactly this, of watching your face while I said it." My father didn't speak. He looked at his hands on the table, then at Theo, then out the window at the water, silver gray in the dying light, boats knocking gently against the dock. "I'm gonna go for a walk," he said finally, and left. He was gone almost 2 hours. Theo and I sat on the porch steps in the dark, not talking much, his shoulder pressed to mine, the ordinary comfort of him the only thing keeping my chest from caving in. He didn't yell, Theo offered eventually. "That's something." "He didn't do anything," I said. "That's the part one don't know how to read." When my father came back, he smelled like the marsh. like he'd walked further than the road and cut through the reeds along the water. He sat back down at the table. Theo made a move to leave the room again, and this time my father said, "Stay. This concerns you too, I figure." He was quiet a moment longer. Then he said, "Your mother knew." I hadn't expected that. "What?" "She told me maybe 10 years ago. Said she thought you might be gay. Said if you were, she wanted us to be the kind of parents you could tell." He rubbed his jaw, an old habit. The same gesture I did when I was nervous, which I'd apparently inherited without ever noticing. I told her I already knew too. I just didn't know what to do about knowing. "You never said anything." "No," he agreed. "I didn't. I kept thinking there'd be a right time, and every year that passed, it got harder to imagine what that would even sound like coming out of my mouth. And then she got sick, and then she was gone, and I told myself I'd say something to you eventually, and eventually never came because I was a coward, and cowardice doesn't feel like a decision while you're making it. It just feels like tomorrow." I found the birthday card, then the one in my coat pocket, and set it on the table between us. He read my mother's handwriting, and his eyes went wet in a way I had only seen once before, at her funeral. "She wrote that to me," I said. "I found it after she died. I've been carrying it around for 11 days trying to figure out how to say what I just said to you tonight." My father looked at the card for a long time. Then he looked at Theo, really looked at him, the way you look at someone when you're trying to see what your child sees. "You make him coffee in the mornings?" he asked Theo, apropos of nothing I could follow. Theo blinked. "Every morning." "He take it black still?" "Never could stand sugar in it." "Black," Theo confirmed. "2 cups. He never remembers to eat breakfast unless I make him." My father nodded slowly, like this small, mundane detail was somehow the proof he needed. Not of my sexuality, which had never really been in question, but of whether I was cared for. Whether the life I'd built in secret was a good one. "Your mother would have liked him," he said finally, to me, though he was still looking at Theo. "She had a rule. Anybody who could get you to eat breakfast was doing something right." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a grand cinematic speech. It was my father, doing the only kind of loving he knew how to do, sideways, through details, through the practical evidence of care. But it was also, unmistakably, a door opening after 6 years of being shut. He stayed for more days. It was awkward in places. My father was not a man who found new vocabulary easily, and there were long silences where I could see him choosing his words like a man crossing a river on uncertain stones. He called Theo your fella for the first 2 days, then just Theo once he'd gotten used to the shape of the name in his mouth. On the 3rd night, he asked Theo to teach him how to bait a hook the way the locals did it, and the 2 of them stood on the dock in the last orange light of evening, my father listening with the kind of attention he'd never once given my report cards, and I watched from the porch with something loosening in my chest that had been clenched there for as long as I could remember. "He's a good man," my father told me later, when Theo had gone inside. "I don't have to understand everything to see that." "You don't have to understand everything," I agreed. "You just have to keep showing up." "I know that now," he said. "I wish I'd known it 10 years ago." On the morning he left, he hugged Theo before he hugged me. A small thing, but it undid something in my chest anyway. He held onto my shoulders for a second longer than usual and said, "Your mother wrote that card because she knew me better than I knew myself. She knew I'd need the reminder eventually. I'm glad you kept it. I'm glad you brought it home to me even 11 days late." "I was scared," I admitted. "I know," he said. "I was the reason you were scared, and I'm sorry for that. I can't get the years back. But I'd like the rest of them if you'll let me have them." I told him he could have all of them. He calls on Sundays still at 6 p.m., but the conversations are different now. He asks about Theo by name. He asks, once hesitantly, careful the way a man is careful with a tool he's never held before, what our plans were. Did we want to get married someday? Did we want a life that looked like a life, the kind he understood? "We already have one," I told him. "It just doesn't look like the one you pictured for me." "No," he agreed. "It looks better. You seem happy. I spent so many years afraid of what I'd feel if I let myself see you clearly. Turns out what I feel is just proud. It was there the whole time. I just wouldn't let myself look at it." Theo and I did get married. Eventually, 2 summers later, on the dock behind the bait shop, string lights strung between the pilings, the water turning gold as the sun went down. My father walked me partway down the makeshift aisle, Theo's mother walked him the other half, and we met in the middle, which felt right, felt like the only way it could have gone. My father gave a short, clumsy toast at the reception. He wasn't a man built for speeches. But he said one thing that I've kept with me since, turned over in my mind on the hard days, the ones where old fears still occasionally surface out of habit rather than truth. I spent a long time being afraid of who my son was becoming, before I understood the truth. He wasn't becoming anyone. He already was who he was. I was just the one who needed time to catch up. I'm grateful he waited for me. Not every kid does. Not every kid should have to. The birthday card sits framed on our mantel now. My mother's handwriting preserved under glass. Whatever he becomes, love him for it. My father finally learned how. Took him longer than it should have. But he learned it all the same, and some doors once opened never close again. Part 2. Marriage, I learned, was not the ending anyone promises you in movies. It was not the string lights and my father's clumsy toast and the gold water behind the bait shop. That was one evening. What came after was thousands of ordinary mornings stacked one on top of the other. And it turned out ordinary mornings were where the real story lived. Theo and I settled into a rhythm that first year. He still ran the bait shop, though he'd started stocking kayaks and paddleboards for the tourist season. An idea I'd half-joked about and he'd taken seriously within a week. I still worked on the marina engines, though I'd been promoted to managing the whole dock crew, which mostly meant I now got blamed for things that were not technically my fault. My father called every Sunday, still at 6 p.m., like clockwork, like a habit older than my whole relationship with Theo. But the calls had changed shape. He asked real questions now, not the careful, testing questions of a man learning new vocabulary, but the easy questions of someone who'd simply become curious about our lives. Theo still got that mutt hanging around the shop? He'd ask, meaning the stray dog that had adopted the bait shop the way strays sometimes adopt places that feed them. Named him Wrench, I told him. Theo's idea. Don't ask. Man's got a sense of humor, my father said, and I could hear him almost smiling on the other end. The sound of him relaxing into a version of fatherhood he'd never practiced before but was slowly getting good at. Then, 9 months into our marriage, he called on a Wednesday instead of a Sunday, and I knew before I answered that something was wrong. Fathers do not break their own rituals for good news. It's your Uncle Ray, he said. Heart attack. He's stable, but I think I need to go see him. And I think if you and Theo could come, that'd mean something. To him. To me too, honestly. Uncle Ray was my father's older brother. A man I hadn't seen in almost 8 years. Not since a Thanksgiving that had ended badly when I was 23 and still deeply closeted, and Ray had made a joke about confirmed bachelors that had made the whole table go quiet in a way I hadn't understood at the time and now understood completely. Ray was, by every account I'd ever heard, not a kind man about certain things. Not cruel exactly. Just closed, the way a door left long enough will simply warp shut, whether or not anyone meant it to. Does he know? I asked. About Theo? My father was quiet for a second. I told him. Last month, actually. Told him you got married. He didn't say much. That's not really an answer. No, my father admitted. It's not. But I think you should come anyway. Not for him. For me. I don't want to walk into that hospital room without my son standing next to me. I spent too many years already standing places without you in them because I was scared of what people would think. I'm not doing that again. That was new, too, my father, defending the shape of our family before anyone had even challenged it. The hospital was 3 states away, in the small Ohio town my father and Ray had grown up in, a place I associated mostly with photographs. Black and white images of 2 boys standing in front of a farmhouse that had been sold decades ago, before either of them had children of their own. Theo drove the first 6 hours. I drove the last 2, my father asleep in the back seat of Theo's truck like a much younger man than he was, worn out from worry in the particular way that only worry about a sibling can wear a person out. Ray looked smaller in the hospital bed than I remembered him looking anywhere. Illness does that, it strips people down to some more honest version of themselves, whether they want it stripped or not. He watched us come into the room, my father first, then me, then Theo trailing a half-step behind, and something crossed his face that I couldn't immediately name. You brought the whole family, Ray said, his voice thin from the ventilator days before. I did, my father said, and there was no apology in it. Just a fact stated plainly the way you'd state the weather. Ray looked at Theo for a long moment. You're the husband. I am, Theo said, steady, the way he was steady about everything, the way I'd fallen in love with in the first place. Good grip? Ray asked, holding out a hand that trembled slightly from the foreline. Theo shook it. Good enough to reel in anything that pulls back. Something in Ray's face loosened, just slightly, the particular unclenching of a man who'd expected a confrontation and found, instead, an ordinary conversation. Fisherman, he said. Bait shop, Theo said. Wrenches too when the boats need it. Ray nodded slowly and looked at my father. You did all right, Danny, he said. My father's name, spoken with the specific gentleness men in that family rarely used with each other. Better than I would have, probably. You'd have gotten there, my father said. Took me long enough. I don't judge a man for the time it takes him to catch up to what matters. I stood there, in a hospital room 3 states from home, watching my father defend a version of forgiveness to his own brother that he'd once needed defended to him, and I understood, more clearly than I ever had, that healing doesn't happen once. It happens in relays. Someone teaches you how to hold the door open, and then you find yourself holding it open for someone else, and the door just keeps getting held generation after generation, until eventually it doesn't need holding anymore because it's simply always been open. Ray didn't become a different man in that hospital room. He didn't cry or apologize outright, or ask us 100 questions the way some people do when they're trying to make up for lost time all at once. But before we left, he asked Theo, gruffly, almost embarrassed by his own curiosity, what kind of bait worked best for catfish in a river that size, and Theo answered him seriously, and the two of them talked fishing for 10 minutes while my father and I stood in the doorway, not saying anything, just watching a small, ordinary bridge get built between 2 men who hadn't expected to need one. Come back, Ray said as we left. Bring the dog next time. Danny told me about the dog. Wrench, Theo said, smiling. We'll bring him. On the drive home, my father sat in the front seat next to Theo while I dozed in the back, half listening to their conversation drift through the dark. I used to think, my father said, that loving my son meant protecting him, keeping him safe from what people might say, what people might do. I thought if I just never brought it up, never made it real by naming it, I could keep him safe from all of that by keeping it hidden. I know now that's backwards. I wasn't protecting him. I was protecting myself. From having to be brave. He doesn't hold it against you, Theo said. For whatever that's worth. It's worth a lot, my father said. More than I probably deserve. But I want you to know something, and I want you to tell him if I don't manage to say it right myself. I'm not just tolerating this. I'm not just getting used to it the way you get used to a new town or a new job. I like who he is with you. I like the man he's become because of you. You didn't change him into someone unrecognizable. You just gave him room to be who he already was, and I'm grateful for that more than I know how to say. I kept my eyes closed and let them think I was asleep, because some things are easier to hear when the person saying them doesn't know you're listening, and because I wanted, selfishly, to hold on to that sentence exactly as it was. Unpolished, unrehearsed, spoken into the dark of a truck cab at 11 at night, more honest for being unplanned than any toast could have been. Ray recovered, slowly, the way men his age recover from things that would have simply ended a life a generation earlier. He came to visit that spring, the first time he'd ever come to Wren's Bay, the first time he'd ever stood in the kitchen where my father had first learned Theo's coffee order, the first time he watched Theo make me eat breakfast with the same gruff insistence he must have used on my father decades earlier, some family habit of care passed down without anyone quite noticing it happening. He brought a fishing rod as a housewarming gift, old, well-used, clearly his own for years, not something bought new for the occasion. Break it in, he told Theo. Mine's earned its rest. That evening, the 4 of us sat on the dock. My father, Ray, Theo, and me, with Wrench sprawled across everyone's feet indiscriminately, and watched the sun go down over water that had, for years earlier, been the site of a 2-stroke engine repair and a stranger's laugh and the quiet, accidental beginning of everything that followed. You know, my father said, to no one in particular, your mother would have loved this. All of us out here together. She always said family wasn't the people who show up easy. It's the people who show up eventually, and keep showing up after that. She was a smart woman, Ray said. She usually was, my father agreed. I looked at Theo, at the easy way he sat with his shoulder against mine, at my father beside his brother, at the dog snoring between all our feet, at the water turning the color it always turned at that hour, gold sliding into blue, day folding gently into evening the way it had 10,000 times before and would 10,000 times again. 11 days, I thought. That's how long I'd carried that birthday card in my coat pocket before I found the courage to bring it home. 11 days doesn't sound like very long, said out loud. But some doors take longer to open than others, and what matters isn't how long it took. What matters is that eventually they open, and once they do, everyone who was ever meant to walk through them finally can. If you are reading this and you are carrying something in your coat pocket, a letter, a truth, a version of yourself you haven't yet said out loud to the people who raised you, I won't pretend I know exactly what will happen when you finally set it down on the table between you. Not every father becomes mine. I know that. Some doors stay shut long after you've knocked. Some rivers never get crossed, no matter how patiently you wait on the far bank. If that's your story, I'm sorry, and I want you to know that your worth was never contingent on whether the people who made you were brave enough to see you clearly. You are allowed to build a family out of the people who showed up, whether or not they share your blood. But if there's even a small chance, if the man on the other end of that Sunday phone call is capable of more than his silence has shown you so far, I hope you find the 11 days or the 11 years, whatever it takes, to set the letter down and see what happens next. Sometimes what happens next is a father learning, late and clumsily, how to hold a door open. Sometimes it's an uncle in a hospital bed asking about your husband's fishing technique instead of asking why you turned out this way. Sometimes it's a whole family, once fractured by unspoken things, slowly rebuilding itself around a truth that was never actually the problem. The silence around it was. We named the dock our own eventually. Theo built a small sign, hand-painted, that hangs from a post by the water, Harbor House. Not because it was fancy, because it was true. My father visits every few months now and stays in the guest room and drinks his coffee black, 2 cups, same as me, and every single time he leaves, he hugs Theo first and me second, and I have stopped minding because I understand now what it means. It means he's not just accepting my husband. He's claiming him. He's saying, you're mine too now. Your family. You always will be. That, more than any toast, any wedding, any hard-won conversation at a kitchen table. That is the ending I didn't know to hope for. All those years I carried my truth around like something dangerous instead of something that, once finally spoken, turned out to be the very thing that brought everyone home. The end of part 2. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a house once it stops being just 2 people's house and starts being something bigger. I didn't understand that until the paperwork was finally signed and the caseworker shook both our hands and told us, in the plain, tired voice of someone who says this sentence 100 times a year and still means it every time, congratulations. She's yours now. Her name was Junie. She was 7 years old, with a gap where her front tooth used to be and a habit of narrating everything she did under her breath. Like she was the quiet documentarian of her own small life. She had been in 3 placements before ours. She did not trust easily, and she told us so on the second night, sitting cross-legged on her new bed with her arms folded like a tiny skeptical judge. You're not going to keep me, she informed us. People say they will and then they don't. Theo, who has never once in his life met a wounded thing he didn't sit down next to, pulled a chair up to her doorway. Not into the room, just close enough, and said, well, we're pretty stubborn. Ask anybody. We'll probably annoy you into staying. She didn't smile. But she didn't ask him to leave the doorway either, and Theo told me later that felt like the whole ballgame. Right there, not trust, not yet, but the absence of a door being shut. A crack of light. Something to build on. My father, when we told him, was quiet on the phone for long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Dad? I'm here, he said, and his voice had gone thick. I'm thinking about your mother's card. Whatever he becomes, love him for it. I never once imagined it would end up meaning grandchildren. I don't think she did either. But I think she'd have liked how it turned out. You're going to be a grandfather, I said, testing the shape of the sentence. I've been practicing, he admitted. I bought her a fishing rod already. Ray helped me pick it out. Don't tell her. I want it to be a surprise. The first months were not a movie montage. They were slow, halting, full of small failures and smaller victories that mattered disproportionately because of how hard-won they were. Junie flinched at raised voices, even happy ones. She hoarded snacks in her backpack for weeks before she believed, really believed, that the kitchen would still have food in it tomorrow. She asked, more than once, when we were sending her back, in a tone so matter-of-fact it broke something in my chest every single time. We're not sending you back, I told her the fourth or fifth time she asked. You're not a library book, Junie. You're ours. Everybody says that, she said. I know, I said. So I guess you'll just have to watch and see if we're lying, same as everybody else. Fair enough? She considered that with the seriousness of a much older person. Fair enough, she said, and went back to her cereal. It was Theo who found the way in the end, not through grand gestures but through the bait shop. He started bringing her along on Saturdays, let her sit on the dock stool and untangle fishing line, which she turned out to be startlingly good at, patient in a way that surprised both of us. Wrench, older now and grayer around the muzzle, adopted her the way he'd once adopted the shop, simply decided she was his and followed her everywhere, and something about being chosen by a dog, unconditionally and without paperwork, seemed to reach a part of her that our words hadn't yet gotten to. He doesn't leave, she told me once, scratching behind Wrench's ears. Dogs don't leave people. Not on purpose. Neither do we, I said. Not on purpose. Not ever, actually. We're not going anywhere, Junie. She didn't say anything, but she leaned just slightly against my side, and I sat very still, the way you sit still around something wild and frightened that has decided, for just a moment, to trust you because you understand that any sudden movement might undo it. My father drove down for her 8th birthday, the fishing rod wrapped in newspaper because he refused to let anyone else wrap it, insisting a fishing rod deserved to be wrapped by the man who'd chosen it. Junie, who had spent the better part of a year testing every adult who came near her, looked at my father with open suspicion. You're the grandpa, she said. Not a question. I am, he said. Reporting for duty. I hear you're good with a fishing line. I'm the best, she said, without a trace of modesty. Good, my father said. Because I'm terrible, and I'm hoping you'll teach me before I embarrass myself in front of your dads. That did it. Some small, stubborn door in her swung open at the idea of a grown man asking a 7-year-old, soon to be 8-year-old, for help instead of the reverse. She marched him down to the dock before the birthday cake had even been cut, and spent 45 minutes teaching my father how to cast, correcting his form with the brisk, uncompromising authority of a much smaller drill sergeant. And my father took every correction with genuine gratitude, and Theo and I stood on the porch watching, not saying much because some moments don't need narrating. They just need witnessing. She's got Ray's stubbornness, my father said later, watching her from the dock, and your mother's patience with things that need mending. Strange, how a kid who's not blood can still carry a family's whole shape inside her. Family's not really about blood, I said. You taught me that. Eventually, he agreed, with the particular rueful humor he'd developed about his own slow beginnings. I got there. Took me embarrassingly long, but I got there. It happened almost by accident. Junie was going through an old box of photographs. She'd developed a fascination with our lives before her, the way adopted kids sometimes do. Hungry for the story of the family, she joined mid-chapter, and she found the birthday card. My mother's handwriting, framed for years on the mantel, had been moved to the box during a repainting and never rehung. Whose writing is this? She asked, turning the card over in her small hands. My mother's, I said. Your grandmother. She died before I met your dad, Theo. Before I even understood myself well enough to know what I needed her to write. What's it say? I read it to her. Whatever he becomes, love him for it. Don't you dare love him for something he isn't. Junie was quiet for a long moment, turning the words over the way she turned over everything, slowly, checking for traps. That's what you say to me, she said finally. That thing you say, about not sending me back. It's the same idea, I said. She wrote that to my dad, a long time before he was ready to hear it. Took him years. But when he finally understood it, it changed everything. I try to say it to you right away because I don't want you to have to wait years for it, the way I did. She held the card carefully, like something breakable. Can we put it back up? On the wall. We can put it wherever you want, I told her. She chose a spot in the front hallway, low on the wall, at exactly her height instead of an adult's, so that every single day, on her way out the door to school, on her way in from the dock with fish scales still on her hands, she would walk directly past the words. whatever he becomes, love him for it. I don't think she fully understood. At 8 years old, the whole history folded into that sentence. My closeted years, my mother's quiet courage, my father's long and clumsy road toward acceptance. But she understood the part that mattered most to her, the part she needed most. That in this house, love was not conditional. It did not need to be earned through good behavior or perfect trust or the absence of a difficult past. It simply was, the way the tide simply was, arriving and arriving and arriving, whether or not you'd yet learned to believe it would. I'm writing this now from the porch of the house Theo and I still call Harbor House, watching Junie, 17 now, taller than her grandfather, insufferably opinionated about everything from politics to the correct way to bait a hook, argue good-naturedly with my father about something on the news, while Theo flips something on the grill and pretends not to referee. Ray passed 2 years ago, peacefully, in his sleep, in a house full of people who'd come to love him despite, or maybe partly because of how long it had taken him to learn how. At his funeral, my father gave the eulogy, and near the end of it, his voice cracking only slightly, he said, "My brother spent a lot of years afraid of things he didn't understand. But he spent his last years brave enough to keep learning anyway." I think that's the whole trick of it. Not getting it right from the start, but refusing to stop trying to get it right no matter how late you're starting. I think about that sentence often. I think about the 11 days I carried a letter in my coat pocket, and the 4 years my father spent unable to say a word he already half knew, and the years before that when my mother was quietly, patiently trying to prepare the ground for a conversation none of us knew yet how to have. None of it happened quickly. None of it happened the way it does in the movies, in one cathartic scene with swelling music and a single perfect sentence that fixes everything at once. It happened in relays, the way Theo once taught me all healing happens. One person holding a door open long enough for the next person to learn how, and then holding it open for the one after that, generation folding into generation, until a family that once could not say a simple true thing out loud built, instead, a whole house full of people who say true things constantly, easily, at the dinner table, on the dock, in the quiet hallway where a small hand-me-down piece of wisdom hangs at. Exactly a teenager's eye level, still true, still being read, still doing its slow and patient work. Junie asked me recently if I regretted the years I spent hiding, the version of myself I kept folded small enough to fit inside my father's silence. I used to, I told her. Now I think of them as the road that got me here. I wouldn't have found Theo on a different road. I wouldn't have this family, this house, you. I'm not grateful for the hiding, but I'm grateful for where the road ended up, even though it took the long way to get there. She thought about that, the way she thinks about everything, slow and careful, checking it for traps and finding none. "I'm glad you kept the letter," she said finally. "Even for 11 days. I'm glad you didn't throw it away." "Me too," I said. "Me too, kid." The water turned gold behind her, the way it always does at that hour, and somewhere down at the dock, a much older, grayer wrench raised his head at the sound of her voice and thumped his tail twice against the boards. Glad, in the simple and complete way dogs are always glad, that the people he loved were still exactly where he'd left them. Home. Still standing. Still holding the door open. The end of part 3.
आशिक हूँ तेरा राजा बाजार का, लगता है मुझको नशा ये प्यार का। आशिक हूँ तेरा राजा बाजार का, लगता है मुझको नशा ये प्यार का। मुस्कुरा के बात करती हो, आदतें खराब करती हो। ना दिखो बेताब लगता हूँ, आशिक बेहिसाब लगता हूँ। ऐसा नशा है तेरे दीदार का, आशिक हूँ तेरा राजा बाजार का, लगता है मुझको नशा ये प्यार का। जिंदगी हसीन लगती है जब ये जालिम प्यार होता है। सांसों में सांस आती है जब तेरा दीदार होता है। नखरा है ऐसा मेरी सरकार का, आशिक हूँ तेरा राजा बाजार का। लगता है मुझको नशा ये प्यार का। नखरा इसका टॉप पर, आती है टिकटॉक पर। नैनो से है नैन मिलाती, लड़कों के है दिल जलाती। पिंडी में है चर्चा इसका, नीरा जितना खर्चा इसका। मैंने बोला इसको मेट्रो में बिठाऊंगा, कैपिटल ले जाऊंगा, F7 भी घुमाऊंगा, मोनाल भी दिखाऊंगा, सेंटोरस भी ले जाऊंगा। आशिक हूँ तेरा राजा बाजार का, लगता है मुझको नशा ये प्यार का। मौसमों की बेकरारी को आजमा के जान जाओगी। हिज्र की आजमाइश में एक दिन पहचान जाओगी। कहना है मेरे दिल बेकरार का, आशिक हूँ तेरा राजा बाजार का। लगता है मुझको नशा ये प्यार का।